Happy New Year to everyone. I want to welcome you to the January 4th, 2021 meeting of the Falls Church City Council. Tonight is a work session. I'm going to go ahead and turn it over to our clerk to read the required notice. Madam Clerk?
And Mayor, for this evening, this is Cindy Mester, and I'll do that for the clerk and also do your roll call.
All right, thank you.
All right, the meeting for which this agenda has been posted will be held pursuant to and in compliance with the Virginia Freedom of Information Act, Section 2.2-3708.2, and state and local legislation adopted to allow for continued government operation during the COVID-19 declared emergency. All participating members of City Council and other boards will be present at this meeting through electronic means, and members of the public can view this meeting at www.fallschurchva.gov/council meetings. And as a reminder, during the move of the FCC TV station to the new high school, we are not broadcasting live on cable stations, but it is being recorded and will be played afterwards. City Council work sessions are conducted to allow council members to discuss upcoming legislation and policy issues. The public is not generally invited to speak. Public comment may be sent to cityclerk@fallschurchva.gov. All comments are provided in full to the members of council and will be summarized at the next regular council meeting. And for roll call, Ms. Conley?
Here.
Mr. Duncan?
Here, yes.
Ms. Hardy?
Here.
Mr. Lickenhouse?
Here.
Ms. Shantz Hiscott?
Here.
Mr. Schneider?
Here.
Mayor Tarter?
Here.
Thank you, Mayor.
All right, thank you, and thank you all. Again, welcome to the Monday, January 4th, 2021 meeting of the Falls Church City Council. We're delighted to have you here with us today. Before we get started, I would like to maybe just ask if we could observe a moment of silence for Sheriff Biddle, who, as you know, passed away recently. And today there was a very moving service that some of us attended that was very well attended with all sorts of law enforcement from throughout the area, and someone playing bagpipes, and just a very moving service. And so I would ask if we could to please join me in a moment of silence for Sheriff Biddle. All right, thank you very much. We did lower the flags at half-mast earlier for him, and we do once again thank him and his family for the many accomplishments and many, many years of service. I believe 54 in total, if memory serves me correctly, more than any other individual to my knowledge in city history. So quite an accomplishment and quite a record of service. Let's go on and get started. We do have a really busy agenda tonight, and let's get at it. We also have a closed session as well. So Mr. Shields, do you want to discuss the first issue, or who's going to be discussing the site distance easement?
We have Zach Bradley on the call, and I think this is probably just a minute or two to ask that this be scheduled for next week for an easement. Mr. Bradley.
Yes, good evening, everybody. And thank you, Mr. Shields. You are correct that we are asking this to be scheduled on next council meeting. So this is just to bring it to your attention, allow you opportunity to ask questions. And this is in the world of easements, this is pretty simple. This is a site distance easement for the newly renovated Buyer Volvo dealership. This is specifically for their ingress-egress access point on Shreve Road, adjacent to the property yard lot. And the reason for this is there's no right-of-way out there right now. The right-of-way is at the edge of pavement, and then it becomes all city-owned property. So the intent of this is to put an easement in place that will secure safe and secure sight lines for any cars exiting. They'll be able to see cars well in advance. The proposed easement is exclusively located in an existing Dominion overhead easement. So we are not, I guess, losing property or foregoing any potential development rights with this. So we are stacking easements on that. And the only thing this would limit us in would be objects over 3.5 feet tall. So we're still able to do the Shreve Road sidewalk that we just got some grant funding for, and any other shorter landscaping that would be associated with that. This has been kind of an outstanding item for them for a while. With some of the staff turnaround, this kind of slipped off the plate a few times. But this is something Fairfax County is requiring them to pursue to get their final occupancy permit and all their bonds released. So this is why it's before you tonight. And with that, I'll open it up to any questions.
All right, thank you very much. Are there any questions or comments from council members? All right, well, that sounds pretty good. I think we're done with that
Excellent.
one.
Very good. Thank you.
I'm sure the rest of the agenda will be just as quick. So let's move on to Broad and Washington. Mr. Shields.
Thank you, Mayor Tarter. So this, we are at least on our schedule, having this as the last work session with the City Council. This is scheduled for final consideration and public hearing by the council. This land use application for January 25th. I'll turn it over to Akita Ruzi, who will give a staff report, but this is a chance just to talk about some of the big issues that the council has raised at your December meeting and the progress we've made on those. And I just want to thank Akita and staff for all of their hard work on this. I also want to thank Insight, who are on this call, Mari Stern and Attorney Scott Adams, for their hard work to address these concerns as well. Sort of the big ones that the council raised is getting our affordable housing sort of policy straight with this project, making sure that the State Theater is brought into the discussions on construction impacts and interim parking impacts, and get them involved in that. We have an update on that. The neighborhood issues and impacts on the rear side on Lawton Avenue, and on just making sure that there is certainty in the voluntary concessions with respect to the Whole Foods. Those are some of the big ones that the council has raised. So let me turn it over to Akita for just an update, and then we'll turn it over to the developer, and they'll be able to describe the progress they've made in these areas. On affordable housing in particular, I think we have some updates, and that's an area where we've really been focused, particularly in the last three to 4 weeks, to try to get that squared up. I think we still have a little bit of work to do on that, but I think we're getting very close to having, I think, a good, clean, and coherent program on that. Ms. Ruzi.
Good evening, Akita Ruzi with Planning. A revised submission of the development proposal was received on December 17th and is before council for review this evening. This submission responds to comments from the City Council, boards and commissions, and city staff issued since the applicant's third submission received in August. The new submission is currently under staff review, and staff comments will be provided as part of the January 25th staff report when the application is before council for final consideration. Summary of key changes proposed in the latest submission is provided on page 9 of the staff report, and includes following general areas, and I'll let the applicant elaborate more on these items, but I'll just sort of hit the highlights. Changes to architecture, massing, and height, including reduction in height by a floor level on the city lot, provided additional articulations in the facades by introducing balconies and additional breaks in the Park Place elevations. On Lawton elevation, reduction in height by a floor level at the corner of Broad and Lawton Streets. And as a result, changes in additions of massing where they introduced a second tier step back along the east and north elevations facing Lawton. Also on Lawton, upgraded to masonry base along the Urban Park and Lawton Street elevations, introduced larger windows and additional articulations. On Broad and Washington elevations, general changes to materials and articulations along Broad and Washington, including additional breaks and balconies. In terms of parking and support of adjacent businesses, according to Insight's latest submission and presentations, they now have the support of Clarendon's and Thompson's Italian. They're providing 65 interim offsite parking spaces on the adjacent property on Park Place during construction. Construction phasing modified to minimize the time when public parking is only available off-site. Then finally, commitments to provide public parking and wayfinding signage per EDA's recently approved standards. In terms of environmental commitments, number of conduits for future EV stations increased from 5 to 10 additional stations in their latest VCs. In terms of uses, commitment to provide between 10,000 to 30,000 square feet for work from home units was incorporated in their latest plans and VCs. The percentage by which the ground floor square footage could be redistributed was reduced from 10%, which is approximately 6,800 square feet, to 2,500 square feet in the updated VCs. In terms of the fiscal impact, there are no changes to the ground floor commercial uses or unit numbers with the new submission. So the projected revenue of 1.5 million from the previous submission should be the same. That said, the city's analysis will be updated to reflect any recent changes in the school numbers with the next staff report. In terms of most recent council guidance, as Mr. Shields just went over some highlights of that, the City Council held a work session on the 7th to review comments received from boards and commissions. Questions and comments heard from council during that work session is provided on page 5 through 8 of the staff report with preliminary responses from staff. The applicant will also provide responses to some of those questions this evening as part of their presentation. Based on council's latest guidance on the application, staff has identified a short list of key items to address between now and final consideration on the 25th, which includes 1, more certainty around the Whole Foods, 2, increased ADUs in the project, 3, continue engaging State Theater for their support, and then finally, working with Lawton Street neighbors to address their concerns regarding height and architecture. The applicant intends to provide an update on these issues this evening, so I'll just stop there, and that concludes my staff report. I'm happy to take any questions. Otherwise, I'll turn it over to the applicant's update for this evening. Thank you.
All right, thank you very much. And we'll go ahead and turn it over to the applicant. I would just say to you, if you can, focus on your immediate changes. We don't need to hear the history of kind of things going back months and months, but just if you could focus on things that have either changed or things you believe you're not able to change in the most recent guidance given to you by council, I think that would be the most expeditious way to come into it today. But with that, I welcome you all and thank you very much, the Insight team, Mr. Adams, Mr. Stern and company. We appreciate you being with us, and I look forward to hearing what you have to say. So it's all yours.
Great. Well, thank you for having us back, and Happy New Year. And I think to your point in your request on the presentation tonight, our goal is to just run through quickly just the higher level changes that were made, and I think a lot of overlap with exactly what you heard from Ms. Ruzzi in terms of the issues we're really focused on addressing. In particular, I think the affordable housing commitment that we've made some really good progress with the city staff on to get up to that 10% of the units potentially being affordable in the project. So I guess just to run through quickly, Ms. Ruzzi talked a little bit about the changes on the architectural front, so I won't dive into that. But I think we did take to heart the comments that we received from the City Council and the Planning Commission, the Architectural Advisory Board, particularly with adding additional articulation, changing some of the materials in the project, and just really overall upgrading the architecture of the project. And so, I think we're happy with the changes that have been made. We think it's a better looking project, and so appreciate those. And obviously, if there are comments on those, we're certainly happy to talk further about the architecture. I did want to just spend a little bit of time on the Lawton Street frontage. I think the council received a letter from some of the neighbors on Lawton Street identifying some outstanding issues. And I think it's primarily the issue that was raised was a question about when we did the full step down of the height on the Lawton Street frontage. And as you may recall, we shifted and removed an entire floor at the highest point of that building, so that the current design right at the corner of Broad and Lawton is one floor less than what was approved in the 2018 approval. and that density was moved further back along Lawton along a 35-foot height plane. And there was a question about just, I think, how the square footage matched up with what was taken out of that floor right at the corner and moved back to the 35-foot level. And the difference there relates mainly to just with the addition of that level and sort of a limited level, we had to add additional corridors and interior elements to make sure we had access to the units. I think maybe taking a step further back from just that micro portion of the building, the overall residential square footage between the August submission and the current submission that's before you, we reduced the overall residential square footage by about 2,500 square feet. So the overall size of the residential in the project actually went down. So just wanted to clarify that a little bit. And then on the discussion of the grocery parking level that does go along the second floor for the entirety of the building, that was something that we had discussions with the neighbors on early on in the process. And I think we recognized that it was not part of the first discussion that we had with them, but I think early in, actually it might have been late 2019 or early 2020, we had a very detailed discussion with them about that change, and the result of that was some really significant upgrades to the architecture and the screening of that portion of the building, so that when you look at the Lawton facade now, that level where it's actually parking appears to be and is designed to match with the residential units that are above it, and then also made sure we focused in the architectural design on mitigating any light bleed or anything else from that. And so, that's something that I think we addressed significantly. And I don't think we've heard any comments from the neighbors on the design of what that looks like now. So I'm sorry that wasn't a part of the discussion we had with them, right when we filed in November, but it was certainly something that was discussed and addressed. And I think from our perspective, we thought that was something that was addressed satisfactorily for them really early on in the project. On the parking, I think as Ms. Ruzzi mentioned, and I think as everyone knows, we do have agreements with Clarendon's and Thompson Italian who are supporting the project, including the approach to both the temporary and the permanent parking that's been proposed. For the State Theater, we're continuing to have a dialogue and to reach out to them. I think part of the issue is they are a little bit differently situated than the adjacent restaurants in terms of the types of events that they have, where they're able to identify people who are running the event or participating in the event, who bought tickets, and really communicate with them in advance to provide parking information and other information to mitigate the impact. In addition, I think we obviously have heard the issues they've raised, and it's been a little tough getting details on what those issues are. I think we've tried to react and incorporate changes into the project as we've gone, based on the information that we have from them. Initially the comments were on just the construction and sort of how parking would operate during construction, and then also post construction. And I think what we've committed to in the parking plan and the voluntary concessions is some significant modifications to our construction phasing to really minimize the time when that public parking is only available off-site. So essentially, they're going to have access to the same 64 public parking spaces at all times, other than a 3 to 6 month period where there's a limited access during the daytime hours. And so that's something that we're open to working with them to mitigate that 3 to 6 month period during the day when the circumstances will be different for them. And I think we certainly want to work with them and want to reach an agreement where they're supporting the project. And I think we've shown with our work with Clarendon's and with Thompson Italian that we're happy to work with adjacent neighbors and get agreements done. I think in terms of the information that we were provided last week, in terms of just updates on some issues that they have, we've reached out to them from that letter, asked for some times to meet, and we're waiting on them to get back to us when they're available to talk. And so, our goal is to continue those conversations and work towards an agreement. But I think one of the struggles that we've had is, the ball's been in their court for most of the past year and a half, with us sort of repeatedly asking what their issues are, and trying to roll up our sleeves and work on it. So you certainly have our commitment that we're ready and willing to drive to an agreement and resolve the issues they've raised. In terms of, I guess, some other issues, just to highlight quickly on the EV charging stations, we heard loud and clear from a lot of the boards and commissions, the Planning Commission and the City Council, that you all wanted an increase in the electric vehicle charging stations. And so we've modified our voluntary concessions to double the amount of conduit that we're installing for future electric vehicle charging stations. So we currently, I guess in the prior commitment, we had a commitment that we would install 5 electric vehicle charging stations and then conduit for 5 additional stations. We've doubled that conduit so that we'll now be providing conduit for 10 electric vehicle charging stations. Each one of those charging stations serves 2 spaces. And so you're really looking at the infrastructure that'll be put in place to serve 30 electric vehicles. Ultimately, if those charging stations that we put in conduit for are ultimately installed. In terms of the Unity and Justice Plaza, we're continuing to work with Tinner Hill and Creative Cauldron to refine that concept, and then also, I think once the project is approved and moves forward, really expanding that out to other stakeholders and creating what we think is going to be a very special place within the City of Falls Church that recognizes those figures and groups from the city's past and present who are pioneers in the fight for freedom, justice, equality, and civil rights. So that is a concept that we're committed to and that we're continuing to evolve as the project moves forward. I think as Ms. Ruzzi mentioned, we're also have a VC commitment now to provide between 10,000 and 30,000 square feet of dedicated work from home units. We think those are going to be unique and creative units that are going to put the City of Falls Church at the forefront of the work from home trend. And so it's something we're excited about and we think is going to be a really successful addition to the project. In terms of the commitment to Whole Foods, we did provide some clarification in our voluntary concessions. Just, I think, clarifying what happens if in the unlikely event that Whole Foods were not to be a part of the project. As you probably recall, the voluntary concessions provide that we will have a minimum 56,600 square foot full service grocery within the project. And the VCs also require that the design of the project conform to the plans and the approvals that you're considering now. And so I think from our perspective, the fallback if Whole Foods is, again, somehow in an unlikely event, not part of the project, that the only thing that could go into the space would be another 56,600 square foot full service grocery. And if that grocer needed to change or modify the design of the plans, we would have to come back through the process. If we needed to change the ultimate user in that space, we're again coming back into the process. And so I think from our perspective, the protection that the city has is the process and the public process that we would have to go through, if there were changes made to the programming of that space or the design of that space. I think that said, I think we're open to looking at better defining what a full service grocery is and trying to, I think, define that with a little more specificity, if that gives, I think, more comfort to the city council. But I think from our view, if Whole Foods pulls out, we're almost certainly going to be back in the process to have a discussion with the city council and other stakeholders about that as part of the project. In terms of accessory dwelling, affordable dwelling units. We have a proposal that we've put forth to the city staff that would get the project up to 10% of the units as affordable. And it's something that we've worked, I think, as Mr. Shields said, over the past couple weeks to really try to dig in and find a solution that increases the amount of affordable units within the project. And so the proposal that we've put forth essentially maintains the baseline options and the flexibility that we've already got built in. And so that 6% of the units is 60% of AMI, and then the flexibility to achieve different unit mixes and lower AMI levels, all of that remains, in addition to the ability to do a cash in lieu as an alternative to those affordable dwelling units. But what we've added is the option for the city to add 13 additional ADUs, which gets you up to 10% of the overall units being affordable within the project. So 34 units potentially. And what we've done is worked with the city to use the city's formula for calculating the value of those additional ADU units, and then targeting it towards the types of units that we've heard from housing staff are the ones that the housing staff wants to see be a part of the project and sort of where the need is. The only difference that I think in coming up with those values with the city formula is we changed the cap rate within the formula so that it matches what's in the pro forma for our project. And I think that's something that in discussions with the city staff and the consultant who helped the city come up with the formula, that everyone's comfortable with the use of that cap rate and calculating the value of those additional ADU units. And so with the value of each of those ADU units established, we've also identified contributions within the voluntary concessions that could be directed towards prioritizing affordable housing. And we've essentially built in flexibility or proposed to build in flexibility that, at site plan, we in the city would come to an agreement on whether those additional units, are something that the city wants to achieve, and then, figuring out based on the values that the value of each ADU unit that we've agreed to, where that money comes from within the VCs to achieve those additional ADU units. So I don't want to speak for the housing staff, but I think our understanding from the discussions earlier today is that this is a proposal that I think everyone can get behind, and that is something that is going to provide a meaningful increase to the number of ADUs within the project. So with that, I've gone on for longer than I anticipated, so I apologize for that. But we certainly appreciate the feedback that we've received to date. I think we're optimistic that the changes we've made in the most recent submission address a lot of the concerns that have been raised to date with the City Council, the Planning Commission, and other stakeholders. And so we're looking forward to continuing to move this project forward. And with that, I will stop, and we're happy to answer any questions that anyone might have.
All right, thank you very much. Let me just get Mr. Shields' take on the ADU portion of this conversation. So, Mr. Shields, what's your take on where things are with what we just heard as relates to ADUs?
We've had a couple of meetings over the past 2 weeks. Ted Risher's also been involved in these discussions. So when we're thinking about different options for affordable housing, to try to have him help us assess to make sure that we're sort of apples to apples in terms of the impact on sort of the value proposition, what the cost of the ADUs, if you will, are from a developer's perspective. If I maybe could, Dana Lewis has been working on this from working with the Housing Commission and sort of the staff lead on this. Dana, would you like to articulate kind of where you see kind of what the greatest need is and how we're proposing to accomplish that need?
Yes. Hi, everyone. Happy New Year. So what we see is the greatest needs is by far studios and 2 bedrooms. I mean, those are, when people come in our office, that is what they are looking for. And we don't have anything. And we also are looking at finding a way to serve 40% AMI, because we don't have anything in the city to serve persons at those incomes at all. We have 1 unit that meets that need, and it's always filled. So what we were proposed was studios at 40% AMI and 2 bedrooms at 60% AMI. And we feel confident that we would be able to fill those pretty easily, because, you know, that's the need that we see people come in our office with. We really don't see a need for 80% AMI units or 1 bedrooms. I mean, you know, we're just saying that's not the strongest need there is. The need that we do not have right now is efficiencies and 2 bedrooms and lower income units. And so that's what we're really hoping to try to accomplish to reach those.
All right, thank you. So, Mr. Shields, just to kind of cut to the chase, is the developer proposing or providing additional ADUs, or are we, quote, as a city buying additional ADUs with a reduction in other voluntary concessions to attain additional ADUs?
So there's been 2 things that we've been trying to do. One is to kind of get the baseline of the affordable housing program set, and I think we're very close to that in terms of the numbers of what we're shooting for. And I don't think we've got final agreement on this. It's sort of at the baseline of 9 units of studios that are at 40% AMI, and 9 units of 2 bedrooms that are at 60% AMI. And we understand, you know, with Ted's help and working with Mr. Stern, of having an agreement of, if we were to increase that, what is the cost to the developer for increasing that number? And then the policy question is, you know, for the city council, what's the best way to accomplish those? Some from council say we should simply demand them. Others have taken the perspective of, well, you know, we recognize that the developer, I don't want to sort of conduct that negotiation in public in this meeting, but where I think we've landed is that we do have an agreement essentially on what the cost per unit is, at least having that understanding from the developer's perspective what the cost is. So the next policy question is, you know, from the city council's perspective, is direction on whether we should pursue that aggressively, and how aggressively, in terms of possibly in the basket of community benefits, having some gives and takes to make that feasible, just in the nature of a negotiation.
Got it. So, and I'm going to turn this over to questions from council in just a second, but I want to make sure we all understand where we are today. And so today we have essentially the same amount of ADUs we had before. Is that correct, Mr. Shields?
Well, if we were to take
square footage.
Well, if we were to take 6% of the units and they were dispersed over exactly what all the bedroom count is in the project, it would be 21 units. Going with the preferred model of 40% AMI for the studios and 60% AMI for 2 beds, you get to 18 units. Now, again, that has not been finalized with the developer. We're sort of still exchanging the numbers on that, but we think we're in the ballpark of landing somewhere close to that. And I apologize to the council. We've been working pretty hard on these for the last 2 weeks, and we just haven't really landed yet. But that's where we are right now. It's 18 units at 9 of the studios and 9 of the 2 beds.
Mr. Mayor, could I clarify one thing on sort of
Sure.
where I think we're at? So I think there's sort of two sort of buckets that we're talking about. The one that Mr. Shields was just referencing is what we sort of think of as the baseline. So essentially the commitment that was already in the voluntary concessions of the 6% at 60% of AMI. And then what we're talking about there is the flexibility that we had previously built in. We have a whole chart that talks about different unit mixes and AMI levels. And I think what we heard from staff this afternoon is for that alternative to the baseline, really focus that down so that we're targeting those studio units at 40% of AMI and the 2-bedroom units at 60% of AMI. And so that's something that we're running the numbers on, right now, and trying to figure out what those unit counts look like. And so that's sort of the baseline. I think the second part of it is what we're calling the option for additional ADU units, which could get an additional 13 ADUs within the project. And that's the trade-off where we valued the cost of those additional units, and the trade-off would be taking some of those other VC commitments and shifting those towards prioritizing affordable housing. And so I think the proposal that we've put together is just flexibility that at site plan, we have the voluntary concessions set up so that we can make a final decision, I think, closer in time to the project moving towards construction, and be able to then, hopefully with some additional policy guidance, make that decision on do we want to achieve those additional 13 units, and where do we want to take that from within the voluntary concessions.
Got it. So this is directed to you, Mr. Shields. So essentially, and I'm not making a value judgment, but just we had 24 units before at 60% AMI. Now we're at 18.
21.
I'm sorry, 21, and now we're at 18, but there's a lower level of AMI. So that's a bigger give or bigger ask at 40% AMI versus 60%. So that's where we are right now. But essentially, that's taking the 21 and kind of essentially creating equal value, or what's perceived as equal value, with lower AMI units. So that doesn't really necessarily get us a bigger affordable commitment. It gets us a different affordable commitment, which presumably monetarily is very similar, if not the same, as our last one. The second bucket we're talking about, which is what council's articulated, is how do we get beyond that? And I guess what I'm hearing now is, to get beyond that, we have to take that from some other pot of money, such as money allocated for school capital cost or library or whatever else is in there of a monetary nature. Is that an accurate portrayal of the second half of this?
Well, we've been pressing for, simply more units, but the development team is not agreed to that. And so that's why I say we haven't landed on that piece. But so the way you've articulated, I think, is the path forward that most likely is going to result in success, having worked this issue for several weeks now.
Okay, so I'm going to go ahead and open it up now to questions from everyone or comments, but I wanted to make sure, because frankly it was unclear to me in some regards before, based on their prior conversation. Let me ask you one more thing, Mr. Shields. Are they valuing selling us a unit the same as when we buy a unit? In other words, if we wanted cash in lieu of the units, we're going to get a certain amount per unit. If they want additional units, we want to get to 10% affordable. Are we both paying the same price in terms of buying and selling, or is there one price when we buy and one price when they sell?
It's the same. And I think that's really been kind of the important thing that's happened I think that's been a big step forward and very helpful.
Okay, great.
So appreciate everybody's working to get that issue resolved.
Great. I just wanted to clarify some of the basic issues before we all start going into questions. So I've got Letty Hardy, Mary Beth Conley, then Dave Snyder, and then others as well. But let's start with Ms. Hardy.
Great. Thank you. Thank you. And thank you, Scott, for clarifying, because I think I also heard that there were kind of two separate issues that we're discussing. One of my, general comment is I do think that we should think about using VCs differently, given that we've been using them in the past to kind of do capital planning. And I think as a city, we've probably spent about $150 million the past 5 years to make capital investments in our schools and libraries and parks combined, versus haven't really made a differential investment in housing. I do think it's appropriate for us to think about VCs differently. One of my concerns, while I do hear staff's comment that we really have demand in the lower AMIs, and I think as a city, in principle, we absolutely should house people across a full variety of AMI spectrums. My concern is we also have units expiring across the city. So I went and looked at the last affordable housing report. We have 9 units expiring at the Reed in 2022. We have 15 units at Pearson in 2027, and then 96 units at the Fields in 2027. So we are losing them faster than we can build them. And so if we have an opportunity to have units in perpetuity, I'd bias towards maximizing as many units as possible, recognizing that while it may not serve people in the lowest AMIs, there's probably a more efficient way to actually figure out how to solve for housing them, and perhaps not in a luxury building as we've got. So I would encourage us to think about maximizing the ADUs we have, especially to offset the numbers that we're expected to lose over the next 5 to 10 years. So that's kind of where I am. I'm certainly open to discussion about how to add the additional 13, Scott. So I appreciate the work that you've done with staff on getting to a number that we agree with. And I'd be open to looking at trading off other areas. I think my question to staff also is, with VCs coming in, I guess probably in the 3 to 4 year timeframe, that's normally when we get the cash contributions close to when the building's open. What do we have in the CIP that's planned to use that money so we actually have real trade-offs in front of us and can actually decide, is housing more important, or do we have a roof over a certain building that needs to be replaced? Because ultimately these VCs have to be used towards capital. So that's kind of a question, but I did want to state, at least my sense is that we have over 100 units expiring across the city, and I want to make sure we are trying to make inroads and make up for that by maximizing the number of units we have in this next project. Thanks.
All right, Vice Mayor Conley.
Thanks, Mr. Mayor. I have 2 questions, one related to affordable housing and the other related to crosswalks. So as I read through, I'm going to pull up another document, so hang on one sec so I can see it. Okay, in the attachment number 2 in the staff comments, DPW said that the $75,000 in the voluntary concessions for crosswalks isn't enough to cover the cost of one crosswalk for the city. Please update to a reasonable cost. Alternatively, you could have a reference what your cost would be and provide documentation to back up the cost. And the response from the developer on that one is, we believe $75,000 is appropriate cost for this work. And then in the VCs, it does say $75,000. I'm wondering if that can be reworded in such a way that it's just to cover the cost of the crosswalks without a $75,000 limit on it, because I would hate for us to end up with half a crosswalk or having to add additional funding in there.
Yeah, and I guess just to address that, so the way the VC is set up, the baseline for us is we actually are installing the 2 crosswalks, unless the city comes back to us and says, we don't want you to install the crosswalks. We would rather have the cash because there are broader improvements to that intersection that are planned to come, and so we would rather have you just contribute to that overall change. So the baseline option, unless the city tells us not to construct them, is we will construct the 2 crosswalks regardless of what that cost ultimately is to us. The $75,000 is the backstop to that. If the city comes to us and says we'd actually rather have the money as opposed to the crosswalk improvement.
Okay, so Mr. Shields, does that make sense as you're looking at the voluntary? I can't pull that one up on my computer as well, but at that specific voluntary concession says $75,000 in it.
Yes, and hi, this is Zach. If I can jump in real quick as well. We're actually meeting with Scott and his team, I think Wednesday, to kind of further hammer out some of the final language for the VCs.
Okay.
So yeah, we'll be finalizing that before it comes back to you guys.
Okay, and then there was another concern about crosswalks in the same area from the CACT, saying that a brick crosswalk may not be the safest in that area, and we should really consider a more safer, reflective crosswalk than a decorative one.
Yeah, we reread that comment, and it is one that staff, I think, frankly, shares. The adopted streetscape standards, which went through a very deep community process, calls for the brick crosswalks. And so we adhere to that standard. Unless that standard is changed by the city council, that is the standard we're going to adhere to.
Okay. How would we go about reviewing that?
So it would require an update to the adopted streetscape standards, and those were last updated, I think, 3 years ago, and it was quite a process. It was probably a year-long, very intensive process. So,
I remember.
Yeah.
So my concern is, as the concern of the CACT with the brick crosswalk is that the bricks get torn up, they don't match, they And as I've walked along different crosswalks in different areas where cars are going over bricks, like in front of the Harris Teeter, it looks terrible. They don't hold up and they don't seem as safe, especially in the main intersection. So I would support in those main intersections having safe crosswalks as opposed to decorative crosswalks. But I guess that's for a different time. But I do want to ensure that within the voluntary concessions, the funding is there to do what it is that we need to do. So that's the first question. The second one relates to the new thinking on affordable housing that's in the VCs. And forgive me if you said this already, I just want to clarify it again in another set of words, which is this is up to the city council to decide the X amount of funding that is coming through the voluntary concessions. The conversations with Department of Human Services has determined exactly what the value of those affordable dwelling units are. We don't have to decide at the time that we do the voluntary concessions, this is going to go towards school capital construction, this is going to go towards affordable housing. Those things are flexible for city council to decide in the future as we go forward.
Yeah,
But-
so our goal, because I think I think in talking with the city staff and I think as part of the discussion that we had with the city council the last work session, there are some policy decisions that need to be made by the city council in terms of
Right.
what the right balance is. And so our goal in the voluntary concessions is setting up that flexibility so that the city council, when we get closer to site plan, there's time to have those policy discussions outside of the context of an individual zoning application, and whatever that policy determination is, the voluntary concessions are set up to accommodate that.
Okay. So, Mr. Shields, what would be the time frame for us to do
Not on
voluntary
mute,
concessions?
I'm sorry, if you're not on mute, please be on mute. I don't know if you guys heard that last one, but anyway, somebody's deep in a cave, it sounds like. So anyway, my apologies for interrupting you. Please go ahead, Vice Mayor.
So, Mr. Shields, I'm just wondering what would be the time frame that we would have to decide where the funding in the voluntary concessions actually goes. Site plan takes about a year till we get to site plan.
Yeah, I think that's about the right time frame. Site plan could be as fast as 6 months, but probably that oftentimes depends on how quickly the developer is putting those plans before us. 6 months to a year.
Okay, so then that would be a completely separate process that City Council could embark on our own with input from the community to determine.
That's right.
Okay, thank you very much.
All right, Mr. Snyder and then Ms. Hiscott.
So, as previous discussions had indicated, there were 4 major issues and the staff report picked them up, and I want to tick off each one of these issues. State Theater, not resolved. Affordable housing, oh yeah, you can have more units, but you can pay for them out of your VCs. We're not going to take it out of our profit in this project, which is probably in the millions of dollars. Neighborhood issues, maybe resolved, maybe not. And then the Whole Foods, no, we won't guarantee that. And we know that we'll roll you when you come back to City Council with a change. So I look at these 4 issues. They've been talked about for months. There's been no real resolution, in my view, satisfactory to the city at this point. I don't know what it takes. It's clear that these issues have not been resolved to our satisfaction. We're a week away from where the developer would like to have an approval, in which frankly, I would like to grant an approval. And yet here we are still after months and months and months, no real resolution satisfactory to this, to me anyway, as a representative of the city. So I gotta say, this is a regrettable circumstance. And maybe the developer just assumes, we'll just make the city, we'll win, the city loses in each one of these. But I just find this an unacceptable resolution. I was hoping to hear tonight that the State Theater has been protected. They're a critical small business. That the developer had agreed to additional affordable housing units? No. State Theater, fully satisfied? No. Neighborhood issues, fully resolved? No. Whole Foods guaranteed? No. I don't understand how under these circumstances, or at least under these circumstances, I'm not in a position to vote for this project, despite the fact that I very much want to do that. So I don't know what else there is to say. We've heard what the developer said. It seems to me clear that all four key issues are not resolved to our satisfaction a week away from when we're supposed to make a vote on this. And I would finally add, recall that the special exception allows developers to make huge amounts of money where they were not otherwise permitted under the existing zoning. Instead, the burden gets cleverly shifted to the city to resolve the developer's issues. I go back to the developer and say there are four major issues. You get these resolved by next week, and I would be very pleased to vote for this project. Thank you very much.
All right. Thank you. Ms. Hiscott?
Yes, I guess to echo Mr. Schneider's comments, specifically with regard to the State Theater and with regard to affordable housing, I just want to understand at the point in time we're reviewing this project for a vote, my hope is that we have solidified the responses on that. And specifically, I'm not sure that, I guess I need to understand a little bit more, Mr. Shields, how the City Council will be making a decision on if we're voting on just a bucket of volunteer concessions, but not deciding how those volunteer concessions are being used. I personally would like to have a decision on how we approach affordable housing before we vote on this. I really, I'd like to see the numbers from the staff. I'd like to have more information on what our options are and how we're going to move forward with that before saying, yes, we'll take that. And then at some point in time later, we might be discussing the policy of how we're going to use the voluntary concessions. So that's important to me in making those decisions. That's all.
Thank you. So Ms. Hardy has got her hand up, but I'm going to go with Mr. Duncan, who has not had a turn yet, and then back to you, Ms. Hardy. Mr. Duncan?
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. I would like to focus my thoughts and questions on the affordable housing element of it. Appreciate all the hard work that's gone into coming up with, a plan that we think is responsive to our needs. I personally, at least, would very much like to support a proposal that makes a commitment now rather than a year from now to whatever we're going to do on affordable housing. And the whatever that I would like to see us commit to is a number that is as close to 10% of the total number of units designated as affordable as possible. How we get to that, my thinking is along the lines of what Ms. Hardy said at the beginning. While it's admirable and desirable to reach down into the lower AMI ranges, and I hope we are able to do that in future projects in the city. This particular project, its characteristics and location and the other elements of it, to me, it would be a great leap forward if we could get 60% ADUs at the studio and two-bedroom level, if that's what staff thinks is most needed, and that we hit a number that's in the 30s. That would be a 10% increase. And I would, I think, as Ms. Hiscott said, I would very much like us to make that commitment next week or whenever we come to a final vote on this, because I think it's important for us to send a message to other developments that are in the hopper right now that, we have a kind of new baseline expectation here in Falls Church. We've been moving, in a good direction with the permanent units rather than the temporary units. But the next big leap forward would be that, 6% is not going to do it anymore. That we expect something, that's got a double-digit number to it. 10 is a good start. And that, we commit to that. next Tuesday. So the headline next Monday, sorry. So the headline that goes out of our work is noticed by the development community and helps inform what they bring to us in the future. As to where the money comes from to do all this work, I have thoughts on that, but I'll leave that comment where I've made it right now, and I'd be interested to hear what Ms. Hardy and others say.
Okay, let me just ask Mr. Lichtenhouse if he's got anything before we go for the second round. Ross, did you have anything you wanted to say before I move to Ms. Hardy?
Dave, I remain recused from this.
Oh, that's right.
Discussion.
I'm sorry, my apologies. Okay. All right, Ms. Hardy, you're up again. Letty?
Unmute yourself, Letty.
Can you hear me now?
Yes.
Okay, it's one of those nights where I mute and then it takes like 10 seconds. Thank you. I didn't realize that we were giving all of our comments. So I had only limited mine to just affordable housing. I did have a couple other ones, some of which Mr. Snyder already covered. So I'll pile on because I do really want to vote for this. I think our vote is actually the 25th. Is that right, Mr. Shields? So Scott Moore, you have 21 days to resolve these issues and hopefully not 7. I really would like to vote for it that has a solid state theater commitment and support for this. So hopefully you guys have 21 days to get there. The Whole Foods commitment, I hear you about what you said that, that another substitution would have to meet the 56,000 square footage and exact floor plan. But for example, if a Safeway comes in and accepts that floor plan, that wouldn't need to come back through City Council. And so that's not good enough for me. I really would love to see stronger language in the VCs that it is a Whole Foods top tier grocer with comparable fiscals, because frankly, as I said before, I don't think we'd be entertaining the sort of density in this project, this corner, if it weren't for a high quality and high caliber grocer like Whole Foods. So that one I will emphasize again to pile onto what Mr. Snyder said. I did have 2 questions. When I read through the board and commission comments, I think the Urban Forestry Commission in particular called out that you were not meeting the streetscape standards for the tree pits. And so being Tree City USA, that's something that we were very fond of here. And so I want to make sure that we are just going back. That seems like an easy thing to address. I don't know whether it's like the size of the tree planters or something in particular, but I noticed in the staff comment matrix too that the planters might be bigger than what's in the standards currently. So I wanted to make sure that you call that to your attention, because that is, a little thing like that does matter for walkability. And that's something that we care a lot about here too. The second request I had is I continue to be a little confused about the concerns we've heard from 107 Lawton. So I think in the staff report, it cited that there was one corner of the property line where instead of the 40-foot buffer, there's only 20 feet from the property line. And I know we don't have pictures to show tonight, but I was hoping staff could show us that, because I'm still having a hard time understanding and reconciling the concerns from the Schultzes versus what staff has said and what you all have said, that we are actually meeting code and there's appropriate setback and reduction in tapering in height versus what I think the neighbors are. So I'd like to put that to bed. And I think the way to do that is just have a visual. It says, here's exactly what it looks like in that corner. Here's how far back we're setting back. Here's how tall the building is. So that's my second. And I lied, actually have a third one. In the past, I've talked about the importance of shared parking. And I think this hopefully will help the State Theater in the long run too. So I think last time I've mentioned that after hours when Whole Foods is closed, rather than keep those 200 spaces cordoned off for Whole Foods, I would love to see a commitment in the VCs that those spaces are opened up for public parking. It seems like a waste to have 200 some spaces when Whole Foods is not using them, for them to not be available. And obviously with State Theater having more late night concerts, hopefully in the near future, those spaces will be really valuable to the city and to our businesses. So I hope that that's a commitment you all can make, and that hopefully makes progress with State Theater as well. So that's it for the remainder of my comments. Thanks for the additional time, Mayor.
All right.
And just to respond to that.
Additional comments.
If you don't mind.
Excuse me?
I would say I can respond to that last comment if you don't mind, related
Sure.
to the parking at Whole Foods. That's something we have brought up to Whole Foods, and we have been successful on another project, and we think that we will work very hard in the next 3 weeks to get that finalized. But it's something we think that we can get from Whole Foods.
You say you think you can? Yes.
We can. Yes.
Okay. All right. Let's hear from other folks. Does anyone else have any additional comments? I know we made comments originally about affordable housing units. Do folks have other comments about the project? If not, I'll make a few myself. one, again, is sort of echoing others' comments. That's what happens when you go last. With respect to the Whole Foods store, I think people are interested in a Whole Foods, not because it's a grocery store, but because it's a Whole Foods. And so I would encourage you and staff to work together language that, again, doesn't allow a run-of-the-mill Safeway or something like that, whether it uses the word organic or something else, but something to kind of ensure that we're getting the what we I think want to get. And I know we can't ask for it by name, but I think there are ways to ensure that we get something maybe above and beyond a run-of-the-mill grocery store, which I think we're all expecting more than that. And remind me too, Mr. Shields, are we going to see a copy, or not we, but you, a copy of the signed lease in the early phases of this project?
So we have seen a redacted version of the lease and just some of the pages of the lease. We've not seen the full lease.
And is it executed, fully executed?
The version that we saw was executed, yes.
Okay. And so just to the developer, it is executed, remains fully executed and enforced now?
Correct.
Yeah.
Okay.
Yes, it has been since we filed back in November.
Okay. Great. And so I'd like to talk a little bit more about, I believe it's on Lawton Street, the cementitious board. I think we got an email, maybe you did as well, from the neighbors who have concern about cementitious board. And although I'm not a neighbor, I don't like it either. And I don't think it belongs on the exterior, public exterior portions of buildings. Can you tell us whether there is, in fact, a kind of a large swath of cementitious board, either on Lawton or the public portion of the rear of your project?
So I think the answer to that is, I mean, we do have some cementitious board, within the project on those two facades. I think we've certainly worked to, add additional other materials to those facades in response to the comments that we've received. And I think, particularly on the Lawton Street facade, at the base, really carrying through the stone material. And then, in the areas where we do have the cementitious board, really making sure the design reads as high quality and very residential in character, so that it is compatible with the single family residences that are next door to us.
So I would just strongly encourage you to consider maybe replacing that with masonry or some other similar material. That's just my 2 cents, but I think it's your neighbor's 2 cents as well. And I know many of us on this body listen very closely to the immediate neighbors, since they're going to be looking at this the next 50 years or so. So anyway, I would strongly encourage you to consider replacing the cementitious board you have in those areas, again, with masonry or something similar. I'd also, once again, echo my suggestion or recommendation to push your setback along Park Avenue from 14 feet to 20 feet. To my recollection, I think there's a subdivision building restriction line that is 20 feet, not 14. I think you'd probably do yourself a favor in the long run, and probably everybody, to go with that. But I'll just repeat that now. With respect to the crosswalks, Mr. Shields, so can you describe them a little bit or talk as to what they are? Are they essentially what we've already seen? Are there any upgrades? It's a pretty busy intersection and the like. Can you describe what they are? Are they any different than we've seen in Falls Church? Any better or safer intersections?
Well, they would be the concrete apron that holds the bricks in place, and then it would be brick pavers in the walk area. So I think the examples would be the ones that you do see in the city in front of the Harris Teeter would probably be an example of what it would look like.
All right, so we've got Mr. Snyder who has got his hand raised, so maybe he wants to elaborate. Jim?
Yeah, this would be similar to what was done at Harris Teeter, and then also at Tinner Hill on Route 29 on South Washington Street. Again, they're bounded usually by concrete, and they're properly installed. They have a factory-made paver that is very resilient. That intersection shows up in a number of city master plans as the most important intersection in the city with special treatment appropriate for it. I know there's always an issue of maintenance. Properly installed, they should last a long time. If you'll recall, every few years we grind down Broad Street and Washington Street and repave it. We usually don't do those. Those are left in place. So the maintenance issue is a debatable thing. I do think they're a part of the city's brand, and they do help distinguish important intersections. Not every intersection needs them, but important ones should have them. With the Atlantic project possibly coming before us, I think we have the potential for getting 2 other legs done with their project because they're on the other corner. So I'll just leave it with that. These are always debated, but I do think part of the city's brand is its distinctive paving. It does not look like it was designed by the Department of Highways in Virginia.
All right, Mr. Bradley, did you have anything to add?
Yeah, just wanted to confirm that these the specs that they're calling for are identical to every other one in the city. So for any council members that are curious about the durability or how well they hold up, I would encourage you to go out to Harris Teeter, Tinner Hill, any of the other sidewalks that have been put in the last several years and get a feel for that. If anybody wants to know the age of how long they've been in, you're welcome to contact me, and I can look that up and provide that as well.
Great, thank you. All right, so my last comment would be that to the extent we are considering changing of our VCs to put some of the money from where it might be today to affordable housing, I think we need to make sure everyone knows about that, because there's other interest groups within the city who may say, you know what, hey, we don't think you should take money from school capital and put it in affordable housing. I'm not making a statement one way or the other about that, but I do think if we're considering having that vote, we ought to make sure people are aware that we're considering that. So that's just something else to throw out as well. If we are going to take that sort of action directed in a way that's different from before in the next couple of weeks, I think people ought to be aware of that as well. Mr. Duncan, Ms. Hardy had comments?
Can we, it's a good suggestion, can we equip the citizenry with information about what the school cap needs are in the CIP that we most recently passed? Just, pull that off the shelf and let people know so they'll be able to understand the impact if we did make a shift.
Yeah, my request is similar. And not to pick on the schools, but I probably put parks and libraries in there too, since they're also getting cash VCs. So I guess
sure, everybody.
Request to why it is, what's planned in the CIP that may be banking on this money in 3 or 4 years.
All right, Vice Mayor Connolly.
I would second what the mayor said, which is I just want to make sure that people in the community understand what we're talking about, why we're talking about it, and what the uses of voluntary concessions have been in the past, and how they could look different in the future, and why we are even considering this. Because I know that there are a lot of people that pay attention to voluntary concessions, and I just think it's important that there's a lot of community input and awareness about any decision that we're making.
All right, thank you. Are there any other comments on this item? Or can we move on to our next one on the agenda? All right, well, listen, thank you all for coming out tonight. I know you've done a lot of great work to get us where we are. It looks like there's just a bit more to do. So thank you, and we look forward to seeing you all soon.
Thank you very much.
Thank you. All right, let's call the next item, Mr. Shields. That looks like that's the vertical subdivisions.
That is correct, and I think probably we will have Carly and Carol McCoskey take the lead on this. Carly, should turn it over first? Yeah, sure. Thank you.
Good evening, Council. I will start with the update on what the Planning Commission's recommendation was, and then turn it over to Carol if she has any additional follow-up. So to refresh our memory, the council was requested to amend the subdivision ordinance to add provisions to allow for vertical subdivisions of airspace. And this ordinance was referred by City Council to the Planning Commission on November 23rd. and is scheduled to come back to council for public hearing and final consideration on January 11th. So the Planning Commission held a work session on December 2nd, and their questions and responses to questions raised during that work session are included in this evening's council staff report. And on December 16th, the Planning Commission provided a positive recommendation of approval with 2 proposed amendments to the draft ordinance. The first was a technical change to adjust the definition of lot, and the second was a clarification that the vertical subdivisions be limited to land that is zone B1, B2, and B3. And based on policy guidance in the city's small area plans, staff recommends including the M1 zoning district in this list as well. Staff has incorporated those recommendations into the draft ordinance for City Council's review, and those changes are highlighted in gray and are specifically found on lines 297 to 299 for the lot definition and 339 to 341 for the zoning district limitations. So with that, I can turn it over to Carol if she has anything to add, or turn it over to the council for questions and comments.
No, I'll just say these are a little bit of narrowing to what was originally brought before you and that you've seen a couple of other times. So they are within the scope of advertising to adopt the ordinance as it would be amended this way to limit the zoning districts within which a vertical subdivision can be done. And I don't think that anything that has been requested will adversely affect how this was planned to be used. But I think there are good recommendations to make these amendments.
All right, let's open it up to questions. Any questions from council? Ms. Hardy.
Hi, thank you. I just had a quick one, Ms. Aubrey. So with it being limited to those 4 zoning districts, I guess what are the remaining zoning districts where this could not apply, and are there potential projects? And ones I'm thinking of in particular would be like a mixed-use condo project that I think we've been trying to build in the city. Would that be allowed?
The zoning districts in which it would not be applied would be the residential, so the single R1A, R1B, townhomes, residential cluster, and then that might be it. So it's basically the remaining districts are ones in which primarily special exceptions are allowed or could be allowed in the future in the case of M1. The other district would be OD. And I wouldn't foresee, so a mixed use condo building would likely need to be rezoned one of the B districts in order to apply for a special exception, because since they're not, and the other one, this is like a quiz on the zoning ordinance, the other ones are the T districts, the transitional, which also are pretty limited in what they allow.
So given that with the special exception, there usually would be a rezoning to one of those B1, the B districts, then the vertical subdivision would apply.
Correct.
Got it. Okay, thank you.
All right, Mr. Snyder, did you have James Snyder, Jim Snyder, did you have a comment?
No, I think Carly got it right. I was just thinking of the T districts. They generally have to get zoned to B or one of the other special exception categories. So I think we've covered the kind of project that Ms. Hardy was speaking of.
Are there other questions, comments? All right, let me ask a couple then. Could you just again refresh my recollection? Who was the genesis of the changes you just recently proposed? Carol?
Sorry.
Or whoever. Carl, I don't care.
Carl, these came from the Planning Commission's review of this item, and they suggested that this be limited. Carly, correct me if I'm not correct.
That's correct. They were concerned about unintended consequences, primarily within like the single family zoning districts.
So is this, would re-subdivision require approval of the planning, or not, vertical re-subdivision or vertical subdivision? Would that require the Planning Commission's approval?
Yes.
And is there any discretion in approving it?
Basically, they're similar to site plans, and where if they meet the code, then they would be approved.
So
I think one of the items that we do have in here now is that they have to meet building code requirements, because that's what really really creates limitations such as egress from buildings and fire access and things like that. That's where the specifics come in, and the subdivision code will specifically reference that any horizontal subdivision of land or any would have to meet code requirements for those aspects.
So just to be clear, let's say you had a single family house in T1, which you can have, right? And someone wanted to create an upstairs, like almost like a condominium, with the top floor being owned by one person and the bottom owned by someone else. If it's T1, would they have a problem doing that? I know we say, well, most of the time it's going to be this, it'll probably be this, but just as a matter of fact, if I wanted to do this in my T1 house, could I create like essentially like a duplex, like a top floor, a 2/2 by doing this?
This would not apply to the T zones.
Oh, I'm sorry, I thought we heard that it was just the R zones, that it are R1A, R1B.
The R and the T and the OD, I believe, and the cluster provisions. It's really intended for more dense development where you have multiple levels of more complex uses.
Well, that's what I'm trying to get at. And so I guess what I want to make sure is that we don't have that unintended consequence of having, someone create 2/2s in a district by right. And so I'm trying to figure out how we could make sure that doesn't happen, other than it's generally intended for this. It'll probably be this. I guess I'd like to make sure it's not, we don't create a loophole for someone to do that.
And I think that was exactly the Planning Commission's recommendation. Their recommendation was that it only apply in B1, B2, and B3 districts. And I think there's been a suggestion that in addition, the M1 industrial districts also include it. But that's the limitation that's being, that was suggested by the Planning Commission that is now in the staff's recommendation.
Jim, did you have another comment?
Well, in this case, I think one of the reasons for this is the West End project, where a more complex project may need different forms of ownership. And so this idea of vertical subdivision is something that can be done, may need to be done for financial reasons, different ownership reasons. And I believe, Carol, this was somewhat modeled on the Arlington approach. Those are almost always special exception site plans of some type or another. And that was somewhat discussed as this went forward, but it's trying to deal with more complex projects that may need that layered ownership, frankly.
I'm not worried about those. Those are clearly going to be covered. What I'm worried about is someone else squeaks by on something that is unintended or something we hadn't really thought about because we're worrying about what happens 95% of the time. I want to make sure that 3% of the time is covered as well. And that, I think the Planning Commission's comments are well taken. I would agree with those, but I'm just wondering, I guess I would just ask you, maybe Carol, in the meantime, to think if there's any other unintended consequences we need to clarify or think about, so that people, aren't doing things that we just hadn't thought about, that create duplexes, 2/2s, or whatever it is, condominiums of big houses that happen to have weird zonings from 100 years ago. And there are some of those houses. I mean, my street, there's several where you have just really monster old houses from 150 years ago, and you don't want those to turn into condos or whatever. At least I don't think so, without some other supervision. So anyway, I guess I would just suggest that you give some further consideration to that.
We will do that.
All right, Jim, you had another comment?
As part of the Planning Commission discussion, I don't think it ultimately ended up in their recommendation, but there was discussion that perhaps a special exception would be one of the things that could accompany this, so that you could, have proper conditions to deal with any peculiarities that might be specific to a particular project. Now, in the case of the West End project, you will have that because the whole project is under your review and purview. Yeah,
I'm not worried about the West End project. I'm confident that one will get all the supervision and analysis it needs. So what I'm worried about are just some funky, hangers on from 100 years ago that have quirky zonings or quirky properties that people may want to use in ways that we hadn't contemplated. So I guess, again, I would just ask the city attorney to give some thought about possible, zoning anomalies or things like that we ought to make sure we hit.
We will look into that.
Okay. Are there any other comments on this particular issue? All right, why don't we move on to the next one, which is the amendment of the B2 Central Business District. Mr. Shields?
And I would like Ms. Arbery to provide the staff report as well. Thank you.
Thank you. So council's requested to amend the city code to add provisions to the B2 zoning district to allow for consideration of uses not otherwise permitted by right as part of special exception entitlement applications. And this item was before city council in November and was referred out to planning commission. And they discussed this item as well at their December 16th meeting, and comments were positive and no changes were made to the proposed ordinance. So what you see is remains unchanged from what was reviewed in November. Their planning commission's motion is included in the staff report, and it is scheduled for final action on January 11th. And so I can take any questions or comments.
All right, thank you. Let's open it up to questions and comments. Council? And just to summarize, this change would allow us to make this change, for example, at West End, but we're not actually making the change. We're just allowing ourselves the flexibility to make this change at a later point. Is that right?
It allows, for council to consider other by right uses as part of a special exception entitlement application, not actually approving any of those such uses.
Okay. Any comments or questions? All right, let's keep going then. Mr. Shields?
Okay, so that we will also schedule then for final consideration at your next meeting. So the next item on the agenda, council, is a review of the comprehensive agreement amendments that are requested by Falls Church Gateway partners. And I would just note that I believe we're joined by Robin Betterell with Hoffman Associates and with Evan Goldman with EYA. And so for the council's sake, I thought I could just go through the terms again and just note that. And Cindy, thank you for putting the slides up. If you could start at the beginning. And so as the council has discussed, this was brought before you for public discussion at your meeting on December 14th. And since that time, we've had a town hall meeting on the 17th, and we will have a second town hall meeting for the public on Friday, January 8th at noon. And we've been publicizing that on all channels, including our local paper, the Falls Church News Press. And the request is to have council discussion and comment on this tonight and schedule a public hearing and final consideration at your regular meeting on January 11th. But to review, with the pandemic, there's been a constriction in the commercial real estate markets and particularly impacting new investments in the areas of office, hospitality, and retail. As we go through the all the changes we've had to undertake with the pandemic, I think we remain very optimistic that when we put the pandemic behind us, that those sectors will recover strongly, but there are difficulties right now. And so Falls Church Gateway Partners has requested changes to the terms of the comprehensive agreement, and I'll just review those again tonight. That would help them with their financing for the project. Next slide. Just for for background, and we walked through this with the town hall just for the public's sake, but this has been a multi-year planning effort to get us to this point. And, were it not for the delays that we've encountered right now, we would be in the midst right now of the site plan for the 10-acre site. We're looking forward to ultimately, if this is approved by the City Council, of moving that site plan forward and having that process start up again. Next slide. The program is unchanged. The amendment does not request any changes to the program, which includes office uses, the blue building at the bottom, the purple building, which is a proposed hotel, and a condo building, senior housing, and a grocery anchored retail complex with the multifamily building, which is the larger yellow building there. The new high school, which is in the kind of upper left-hand corner of this slide, that is nearing completion. And in fact, teachers have been in through the holiday week of moving furniture in and getting ready to receive students, and students will be attending the high school very shortly. Next slide. So some of the things, again, that have not changed: the proposed program, which includes the hotel, office, civic spaces, senior housing, condos, and apartments. With this requested amendment to the comprehensive agreement, they would remain in the ratios that have been discussed earlier in the site plan that had some initial reviews by the City Council and boards and commissions. Falls Church Gateway Partners will carry out the demolition of the high school by May 29th. That's a condition of approval of the amendments. And so the summary of what has changed includes the delivery date, with the exception of the demolition, which I just mentioned, which would be delayed by approximately 6 months. Reduction in the capitalized ground lease payments, and we'll go through those in just a bit more detail. An increase in the ground rent payments over the 99-year term, and some changes to the profit share provisions. There's also a change to the Community Development Authority, and I'll describe that change as well. Next slide. So the payment structure, we were in the comprehensive agreement. The city was to be paid 4 additional payments of $7 million each for phase 1. Those $7 million payments would be reduced to $4.5 million payments in each of the fiscal years of the next 4 years. So that is a reduction in total from $34.5 million to a new figure of $25.5 million. The ground rent payments would start earlier and escalate at a higher rate. They would start at $200,000 in 2025 instead of the original 2029 date. They would escalate over the 99-year term of the lease at a rate of 2.75% as opposed to 2%. There's also a plus up in the year 2031 of $25K that is part of this amendment. So those changes to the ground rent payments have a nominal value increase of $45.7 million, which is really a feature of the length of this ground lease, is how that benefit accrues over the long term. The total value changes, however, from a present value, it is a decrease, and it's that is obviously a feature of this to try to help this project move to financing. The present value decrease is $3.2 million. The nominal value increase after the deductions that listed up top is $35.8 million. Next slide. So the schedule of the payments is really important to us in terms of financing the debt for the high school. In the column that is labeled Comprehensive Agreement, or CA, those are the original terms. The city's already been paid $6.5 million. That payment came after the signing of the Comprehensive Agreement last year. And then the $7 million payments over the next 4 years are reduced to $4.5 million each year, as noted earlier. There's the profit share, which I'll describe in just a moment, for the condo participation that would occur expected in 2025, and then the ground rent starts in 2026 and then escalates at a rate of 2.75%. Phase 2 is not in this chart, and that remains at $10 million or the appraised value, whichever is higher, and that provision is essentially unchanged. Next slide. So some of the profit share provisions. There's a 30% city participation in net condo sales over $750 net square feet on average for the condo building. So as an example, if the actual sales average to $800 per net square foot, that would result in a benefit of $2.25 million to the city. Now, $750 a square foot is high for the city, at least based on product that is in the city right now. But this is anticipated to be, in a class that is higher than other product in the city. And so that is the 750 is essentially the pro forma number from the development team. There's a share of 50% of the land lift when the construction loan closes for the site. In other words, the land is appraised as part of that financing, and to the extent that the land is valued higher than the value that's set in this comprehensive agreement as amended, the city would get 50% of that benefit. In the existing CA, that was a 25% share that the city got, so that's been doubled. The 50% capital administrative fee for the leasehold, each time the leasehold is sold or refinanced, that is now out of the agreement. And the capital administrative fee is kept on the condos with an exemption for the first sale or the developer's sell-off of the condos. But then in subsequent sales, the city would accrue a 25 basis point capital administrative fee for those sales. Next slide. So the high school demolition would proceed and be cleared out of the trapezoid area where the sort of entry pavilion for the new high school will be, as well as the trapezoid parking area. And that work will be done by May 29th, 2021. It does involve what Falls Church Gateway Partners is proposing is to demolish that section of the high school first, and then they would complete the remainder of the high school later in the fall, and they'd have a commitment to get that remainder demolished by a date certain. The Washington Gas Regulator Station, that currently is a cost to be borne by the developer. That cost would shift to the city. The city is right now in discussion with Washington Gas to have Washington Gas cover that cost, and that issue, we're pushing for a resolution of that issue, and that has not yet been resolved. That's a $2 million increase in cost to the city. The pilot, the payment in lieu of taxes abatement program, remains unchanged with this amendment. And the closing date, we are shooting for the target closing date of December 31st, 2021. And that's an issue that we need to get fully resolved this week. Next slide. The debt service coverage with this chart basically is produced by the city's finance department by Ms. Bawa, just showing how our debt service that is from the high school as well as from the library and city hall, the extent to which that is not currently being covered by our tax rates. In FY 2021, that's a figure of $6.4 million. In FY 2022, that's a figure of $5 million. That does decrease down to just under $4 million in FY 2023. So in those, while 2022, we would run a deficit or a net draw on our capital reserves. With this payment plan of the capitalized lease payments, we would cover our debt service for the next 4 years. And then after that, we would draw on the reserves again for a period of time until the expected tax yield comes online and covers the full amount of the debt service for the life of the lease. That's the way we've modeled that. That's based on our projections. And so that's obviously has been a central driver of our entire plan for the development of this site from the beginning. Next slide. Other provisions, I mentioned the high school demolition. That would be done by May 29th by the developer. I'm sorry, we went the wrong direction there. Thank you, Cindy. The Community Development Authority, Falls Church Gateway Partnership has communicated to us that they are depending on that Community Development Authority to issue bonds for infrastructure improvements at West Falls. The city, under the amendment, that was always characterized as an option that the city could exercise at its sole discretion. With this agreement, we would be agreeing to create the CDA and to issue the bonds. The city would not extend its moral backing to those bonds. The real estate itself will, the bonds will be covered simply by the value of the development itself without backing by the city. And the city would not pay the $2.5 million to the city for creating the CDA. Next slide, it just has the graphic of the area. Again, this is the development that we're discussing here, and that is the area that would be encompassed by the Community Development Authority, and the tax of up to 15 cents on the tax rate would be assessed on this property in order to cover the bonds that are issued to pay for infrastructure on the site. Next slide. So that's just a quick summary of some of the main points. We are in the process right now still of document exchange on between the city's transactional lawyer and Falls Church Gateway Partners transactional lawyer, and there are details on those that we're still working through, but those are the main terms. And so I'll stop there. I will note again that Ms. Betterell and Mr. Goldman are on the call to answer any questions that you have, but let me stop there and hear the council's comment and questions as we continue to work this.
All right, Mr. Duncan, and then Mr. Snyder.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. Is everybody on mute? Because I'm hearing an echo. Okay, let me start again. Why? Just one quick question. Why on the present value and nominal value figures that you gave, it would be helpful for me to understand what that is as a percentage of what we had expected to get. Are we taking a hit that is, 10% of less than what we had hoped to get, or is there a number that is a denominator for those figures?
Wyatt, you're muted.
Yeah. I thought it was such a dumb question that, everyone was left speechless.
The simplest way to answer your question, Mr. Duncan, is on this slide of the reduction in the capitalized lease payments, which are the sort of the surest payments of this whole transaction, reduction from 34.5 to 25.5. And so that's a significant reduction. In terms of the comparison of the old present value to the new present value, we did look at those, and there is a reduction of 3.2 million to that, and I don't recall exactly what that figure was. I know the difference is 3.2 million, but we can get that plugged into these slides so that you have that.
I guess what I'm trying to get an understanding of what those numbers are relative to the scope of the entire project. The real estate value expected. I don't know. Is this a $500 million project and we're getting 35 million less, or do you see what I'm asking? I'm just trying to get some sense of scale.
Well, when we were presenting this a year and a half ago, we did have all those numbers sort of stacked up so you could see them, and we could do that again. And And so we'll make sure that that's in the slide next time. Mr. Risher, if you actually have those numbers right in front of you, we could cite those again, but probably would be best if we just add that to the slide.
Okay, great, thanks.
Mr. Snyder?
Well, thanks a lot. Is the city attorney on?
Yes, Ms. McCoskey is on the call.
Okay, a question for her.
I am here. I finally managed to unmute myself. Go ahead.
Is it correct that we've disagreed with the legal arguments the developer is making to support their demands for these changes?
Yes, and they claimed this was a force majeure, and we have taken the position that there was not a force majeure event under this contract.
Okay, thank you. So let me try to get to really down to the basics here. This is not the first restructuring of the finances of this project that benefit the developer and increase the risk to the city. There was an initial $7 million. Now there's a $9 million demand. It's a total of $16 million with the hope or promise that, well, sometime down the road, decades later, you may get back some of the money that you're giving up in the short term to the developer. It's already been noted that this will require us to dip into our reserves, which means that the risk that the developer ran in signing this contract is being shifted to the city, and we're getting nothing in return. The point was made about, oh, they'll live up to their agreement to demolish the old high school. Well, that was in the original agreement. That's no concession to us whatsoever. And again, it's just a total so far of $16 million of restructuring and a shifting of risk from the developer to us. I would negotiate a tougher deal than what has been presented. I think it exposes the city to increased financial risk while the developer protects its profit and in a manner and based upon a legal theory, which we've just heard, the city has disagreed with. So I will just conclude my remarks by saying I find this to be an unacceptable proposal. Number one. Number two, I have no confidence whatsoever that 2 weeks from now or 2 years from now or 2 months from now, the developer will come back and demand yet another restructuring, which will strip additional value from the city and move risk from the developer, which they freely assumed in this contract, to the city after the fact yet again. So for all those reasons, I don't think this is a good proposal in the interest of the city. Thank you.
All right, thank you. Vice Mayor Connolly.
Thanks, Mr. Mayor. I just want to focus on the demolition of the old high school. When you say, Mr. Shields, that they've agreed to demolish the trapezoid area by May 29th, is there a picture of exactly what that looks like? And how half a demolished building is going to safely be there next to a school?
So I don't have that image. We had a detailed discussion of this with the infrastructure planning group just before the holiday. And if you take the existing high school, there's a break point in it where it can be safely, essentially cut. And so that cut will be made, and one half of the high school will be demolished first, with a focus of getting the trapezoid area delivered in a stabilized site to Gilbane in time for them to complete the work in the summer of 2021. Then once that work is done, then they, without any cessation of activities, then they just shift their focus to the second half of the high school. And they are committing to a date certain to have that second half demolished as well. So there is not a condition where there'll be a half of a high school there and nobody there working on the site to demolish it. It's really just a phasing of the project.
Okay. And the schools were part of the infrastructure committee discussion on this and understand this process?
Yes.
Okay. All right, thank you.
Are there other questions or comments? Mr. Lichtenhouse.
Thank you. Ted, remind me again, what's the discount rate that you used to come up with our present value on the current deal?
3.5%.
3.5. Okay. And what's our or Kieran, if she's on the phone, what's our latest borrowing rate on comparable debt, municipal debt?
We're currently borrowing at approximately 2%.
So, Ted, what does that do to our present value if we change that discount rate in your model to mimic something closer to our own borrowing rate as a municipality?
Just plugging it into the last model, it takes a $3 million loss and turns it into a $3 million gain.
Okay. All right. The reason I asked that, and Phil, this kind of goes back to your question, is that a lot of this can seem somewhat confusing, especially when you're trying to look at the delta from where we started and where we are now. I think the important part is some of the assumptions that we're making are I would say purely based on market assumptions, and depending on which lever you pull in that model can change that present value. From my perspective, I guess, Phil, I'm just speaking directly to you and anybody else that's got, similar questions about the value. Changing that discount rate can be somewhat of an opinion, but I would say prevailing kind of methodology would be to try to mimic closer our borrowing rate as opposed to the 3.5, which is a much more conservative assumption. So depending on what assumption you change can change whether it's a loss or a positive. The one thing that I focus on is the overall nominal value. And although we have split our payment for this land up and the value between the capitalized ground lease payments, which are our upfront payments, and we've split that and bifurcated it with the payments that we get in the long run, which are the longer ground lease payments. At the end of the day, we're getting more money. We do have to wait a little bit longer, but those ground lease payments are guaranteed, and they do convey with the land, regardless of who owns the leasehold improvements on top of it. So I do just want to point that out and clarify for anybody that is looking that present value is based on really changes based on that one assumption that I just mentioned, which is the discount rate. And there's all sorts of academic research on what's an appropriate discount rate depending on who's running the model. And if you run it based on our actual borrowing cost or even something close to our kind of average borrowing cost over the last few years, that present value number is not a loss anymore. It's either a wash or it's positive. So I did just want to point that out. A question about the CDA, because that was something that I was interested in when we started this, what feels like 100 years ago, but apparently was really only back in 17. The CDA, the 15 cent tax rate is going to go to pay for the bonds which will be issued for the infrastructure improvements that are just specific to that commercial site, correct?
That's correct.
And then what happens when those bonds are effectively retired?
So I think that, these are things that need to be kind of put into the documents of the CDA that form it. But I think in theory, the CDA would exist that if there is debt capacity, they could make new investments of infrastructure on the site. Now, it'd have to be within the four corners of this site,
right?
If the taxing authority is used to support it. But I think that becomes a lasting instrument that could be used for improvements on the site forever.
Okay, I think that's important for folks to understand who may be listening as well, that CDA provides us with a vehicle to invest in infrastructure specific to that site for, what could be things related to public service costs, given how much more densely populated, both from a real estate and a people perspective, that area will be. And so even if we extinguish or retire all of the bonded debt that goes to pay for the infrastructure initially, 30 years from now, if there's another investment that needs to be made within the four corners of that site, whether it's an additional and auxiliary fire station, police, could be any number of things that would fall under that. We have the ability to raise those funds to pay for that. And so I think that, one, I'm glad that we don't have to provide the moral backing, but having that vehicle for a CDA allows us to make some investments up there without putting that tax burden on the entire city. So I think it's an important vehicle, and I'm glad that it's there. I will echo the sentiments, I think, of a number of folks to say that, sorely disappointed, obviously not disappointed, but upset that we are having to have these conversations. And it certainly is creating angst from a number of folks that have been heavily invested in this here in the city for a number of years. But the reality of the situation is that the market has shifted. And I will point out that, what we have been asking the market and the vision that we had set out from the very beginning when we took this to market was to look for a unique one-of-a-kind project that has a variety of uses and mix of assets. And so I think that us maintaining that vision, especially in light of what's happening in the current real estate environment, is when we see a downturn like this, it's going to force us to have to make some decisions. I'd like to see this overall proposal improve a little bit, but I think generally speaking, it's not a place any of us want to be, and I certainly don't want to be here again. And so, I say this to the development team and to anybody else that's listening. It's not part of that. In my mind, we've been back to the table twice. I certainly, at least during my time on council, will not entertain an idea of coming to the table a third time. I think that's been exhausted. I think we do have brighter days ahead. I'm hoping with these changes we can get a deal across the board. I think that there's still a lot of money for the city to make here. And I want to make sure that we deliver on what is still a very, very unique, complicated, complex, mixed-use development that is unlike anything that we've seen in the area. And with difficult, complex projects come difficult, complex conversations. So with that, I'll yield the remainder of my time, Mr. Mayor. Thank you.
Thank you. Other comments or questions? Maybe I'm drawing a blank here, and I'm sure I am. This is why this isn't a new development, the CDA. This has been part of the quote proposal since December. Is that right?
That's correct. It has been part of the proposal since December 14th.
And let's try to explore just a bit about not having the moral backing. What do you think that means? In other words, if the city's name is on here someplace or the other, don't you think we have to stand behind it, whether we say we are or not?
Well, I will say that the moral backing is something that our financial advisor took very seriously and was not very enthusiastic about in terms of him giving, us advice about this. What is typical under Virginia law is that the local government does not provide moral backing for a community development authority. And so one problem he had is that it was a little bit unusual for the local government to take on that responsibility. Now, earlier in the original CA, we were being compensated for that to the tune of $2.5 million. I will say, I think he still felt like that was an undue risk for the city to take on. So what it means is that there'll be explicit documents stating that these bonds are not backed by the City of Falls Church. And so the buyers of the bonds will be, that will be information that they will see when they're reading the prospectus for these bonds.
And what is their recourse if the bonds aren't paid back? What is their recourse? Their collateral for this, city attorney or somebody? In other words, the bonds don't get paid back. What do the bondholders do?
The CDA would, if the assessed value does not come online sufficient to pay the bonds, then the CDA will have the option to raise the tax rate so that it is covered, or default on the bonds.
And then what? You default on the bonds, and then what happens? You get the land? I mean, if there's a mortgage, you take the property back.
If there's no moral obligation and they can't come to the city, I'm not sure they have, that the bondholders have a great deal of recourse at that point.
Maybe you could let us know, Carol, just sort of what.
Clarify that. We did have,
are.
as you know, we had outside counsel with lots of experience on this, but I think essentially there wouldn't be much recourse, and that would probably be reflected in the price of the bonds when they were sold. But I will get further information on that.
Who is the CDA? In other words, who are the representatives on the CDA? What is the decision-making structure of the CDA?
There would be a board of directors that would be appointed by council at the time that you created the CDA. You know, it could be simply the members of council. It could be others with representation from the members of council, but it's fairly flexible. And when the city council creates the CDA, it will name the board of directors and how they're chosen.
I see. So it's certainly likely that the members of the CDA will be members of Falls Church city government and the like. And so the decisions on what to borrow for and the like will not be purely a developer function, correct?
I think that's correct, although I do think there's an understanding at this time of what the developer plans to use the CDA money for as part of this agreement.
Well, you mentioned earlier that we can reborrow and it can go on forever and ever. Right. And I guess I'd like to have some more guardrails around this thing and know what the long-term intentions are and who controls it. So I guess for my money, I would like to have more information about how a CDA would function in practice and how it will work and how it might work and who controls it. And if things don't play out, what the ramifications for the city are.
Right. We have outside counsel who was brought in to help us with this, and we didn't bring them in tonight, but they can certainly answer all those questions. But I think for down the road decisions about additional borrowing and all, that would be the board of directors. That would be could be created by the council, and so you would have some ability to control that group and ensure that it's created in a way that will protect against future borrowing beyond what the ability to pay.
I guess if you could, preferably even before then, maybe just let council know what your feelings are, the limitations on that, and the like, because I guess at this point I'm not really certain, and I have concerns about who would control this, what are the boundaries and guidelines of it, and what happens if there's a default. So those are some questions I have, and like my colleagues, I also anticipate this being the last time we go through this, and understand we're in extraordinary times, but nonetheless. Ms. Hardy?
Thank you. Wyatt, can we go to slide 7 where we talk about what reserves look like with the change from $7 million to $4.5 million payments? Sorry, maybe it wasn't slide 7. I must be on a different version. It's the one with the green and white chart that shows by fiscal year what the balance in that one. Slide 9. Thank you. I wanted to confirm that even though while we can cover our debt service payments, obviously for the high school and others, that we are not out of compliance with our fiscal policies. It says we should have a certain amount of reserve set aside based on total outstanding debt. I know we adopted new policies for that. And the main years I was concerned about it, obviously, is FY22 when capital reserve zips down to $9 million.
Yeah, that's the crunch point for us. And as long as we've been modeling that, sort of those close-in years have always been the toughest years. But yes, we would remain in compliance with fiscal policies.
So it would not require us to set in additional money into reserves to be in compliance.
That is correct.
Okay, great. Thank you.
All right, other questions, comments? All right, thank you all very much for this topic. Let's move on to our next area, which I believe is just council comments and scheduling and the like, but I'm looking for my agenda here quickly. Are there any comments about boards and commissions and council liaison, any reports of that nature? Ross?
Yeah, I just have a request for Wyatt. When we have an opportunity, can you guys throw in the agenda here for us to get an update on traffic calming? I know there's been some back and forth about concerns over South Lee. I just want to revisit that and get an update as to where we are on the various projects.
Absolutely. Sure.
Thank you.
Other comments? Ms. Hardy?
Thank you. I was going to raise traffic calming, so thank you, Ross, for bringing that up. I mentioned this before we started. So traditionally, we have a day of service on MLK Day. Obviously, in COVID times, Wyatt, I'm not sure if staff has any ideas of where we could contribute to the community. And obviously, there's a lot of people out there who could use help. So if there are creative ideas where council could lend a hand, I think we'd all be open to using our time that day to give back to the community in some way.
Thank you for raising that, and we'll get back to council with some potential ideas.
Mr. Snyder?
Sure, thanks. Several regional boards and commissions, regional, not city only, have a year where they review their membership and who represents them from the city. I think we've taken action on that, but I think it may need to be communicated to like the Council of Governments, NVTC and NVTA. I just wanted that to go out to make sure that we continue to have representation on all of those bodies. Thanks.
All right, Ms. Messner?
Thank you, Mayor. I just wanted to do a quick reminder of Senator Saslaw and Delegate Simon's legislative town hall meeting this Wednesday, 7 to 8 p.m. It is, of course, virtual, and the city's website has on the calendar as the link for the Zoom meeting, as well as to sign up to submit questions and comments in advance so we can facilitate the discussion. There's been social media press from both our delegation and our own local communications office, and council directly and the legislative committee received an email with the link as well. So looking forward to a good discussion on Wednesday with the senator and delegate.
Thank you. Mr. Duncan?
It just seems a little odd to go through the whole meeting without some discussion or information about vaccinations. I wonder if Wyatt, of our dealings with the regional health people, have given us any new information or any degree of expectation about when our elderly residents, nursing homes, assisted living, first responders, et cetera, might be getting their vaccination shots.
Well, I think our phase 1A population are getting vaccinations now as we speak. There have been about 200 vaccinations in the city. And so that 1A group is frontline healthcare workers who reside in the city, not necessarily work in the city, but have their domicile in the city. And then our seniors who live in a congregate care setting, so Sunrise and the Kensington. Phase 1B is a broader population that includes individuals that are over 75 years of age, and includes essential personnel such as police and teachers. So the big question is, one, how is there progress in 1A? I think everybody views it as slower than we would like, and so there's I think a lot of pressure and push to speed that up. And then the next big question is for phase 1B, when is that going to start? And in regional calls we've had with state officials, we've been told late January for phase 1B. So that's the best information that we have. And that will be by appointment, and for teachers, fire, police officers, and individuals over 75 years of age, and individuals that have particular vulnerabilities or conditions that make them particularly vulnerable to for morbidity from this virus. So I think the phase 1B is sort of the big question that we all have as to when that's going to roll out. And right now, so far, the earliest is late January.
So I'm just wondering, what's our communications strategy or timing? Do you expect, like something once a week from whatever it is that would come out through social media or be announced at our council meetings? Or it's just, just so much hangs, I don't need to even say it, so much hangs on us being able to get the vaccinations out and get the economy hopefully back to where we want it to be. And I'm just, I know everybody's interested, and maybe we don't know as much, but giving people some sense that, we're tracking this closely and doing all we can to get attention for the little city here is important.
Well, that's right. We are still putting out the weekly COVID newsletter that has information for the public, and when we have big news, we push it out on all channels to raise the profile for it. Yeah, go ahead.
I was just going to say that the state is purportedly going to have a dashboard that indicates by jurisdiction how many vaccinations have been administered. And I'm not sure whether that's actually become live yet, but that is the intention, to have more detail get pushed out on a local level throughout the state.
Mr. Mayor, Dave Snyder, a follow-up question and comment, if I might. Thank you, Councilmember Duncan, for raising this. I'm not satisfied with simply better reporting about distribution failures. Is the City Council willing to submit a letter to the state and to the health district saying that we find that this level and pace of distribution is not acceptable? I hope that we would find a way to do that. The fact that 1A only will be gotten to by the end of January, 1B even later, and the rest of the population 65 to 75, who knows when. I just don't think that's an acceptable position for the city to endorse or support, or to do anything other than to object as strenuously as possible. And maybe this is something we need to bring to the attention of our state representative and state senator when they appear. But I know some of the blame, or a large part of the blame, belongs with the federal government. Hey, put it there, that's fine. But I just, as I listen to this, and it's not you, Wyatt, at all, because you had to answer the question. But I, for one, am unsatisfied with just simply asking for better reporting of failure.
Well, I'm not saying that's what we're asking for. What I'm saying is that the state is going to provide that. The question was, do we have information we can put out to our citizenry? And I think the answer will be yes. But are we satisfied? No. Are we saying that to state and federal officials? Yes. Well, I mean, today, NVRC, we had Congressman Beyer on the phone. And that was expressed directly to him, that people are frustrated. He's frustrated as well. Next Monday, NVRC will have the state official who's in charge of vaccination for the state on the call. We have been expressing it. It's difficult to move the needle as Falls Church, but we are certainly expressing the concern that things are not moving as quickly as they should be. I mean, during World War II, fewer people were dying on a per day basis than are now. And we had factories going 24 hours a day by the end of the war, cranking out a ship, one a minute. I mean, to my mind, we ought to have that same mentality, wartime footing, because we are at war with this disease. And I'm very frustrated that the pace seems so slow, and that I don't know why we're not even administering these things 24 hours a day, because we got to get them out to people. And if they're in a warehouse someplace, it's time to move them out. people are dying out there. So I think all of us share that frustration, and that has been shared with elected officials higher up the food chain. But there's a lot of moving parts of this thing.
Mr. Mayor, I don't doubt at all what you're saying and that your efforts through NVRC are much appreciated, but shouldn't we provide some sort of written demand or written statement just indicating representing our citizens at extreme displeasure at the pace by which this is proceeding?
Well, I mean, to me, I think it would be most effective on a regional level, to not just have Falls Church write its own letter, but that's something I think can be broached regionally to see if the entire region can share our frustration with officials at the state and federal level. And I think that's a reasonable request, and I'll bring it up with my colleagues on the NVRC.
Thank you very much, Mr. Mayor. I appreciate that.
Sure. Mary Beth?
Thanks, Mr. Mayor. I just didn't want this day to pass without noting that it actually is a very momentous day in the city of Falls Church. Our largest capital project has opened. The temporary occupancy permit was issued to the schools for the new high school, and there were teachers in there today unpacking their classrooms. There's a lot going on in the school. It is beautiful. Construction continues, but this is a day that so many of us on this call and in the city have worked so hard to get to. And I do think that if we were there, we could all raise a glass and celebrate, and we can all do that from home, because this is really just so impressive that we've gotten to this point. And there are many more steps to go, but definitely a worthy milestone to celebrate.
All right, thank you. That's a big accomplishment for this city, maybe its greatest accomplishment. So it's big news. All right, anything else before we take a short break and then come back in closed session? All right, I'm going to go ahead and read the motion to go into closed session, and then we'll take a break, let the cameras come down, and then reconvene in closed session. So upon a motion made by Council Member
Duncan,
seconded by Council Member Hardy, okay, and passed by a vote of City Council, Council went into closed session pursuant to Virginia Code Section 2.2-3711A3 for discussion or consideration of the disposition of publicly held real property, where discussion in open meeting would adversely affect the bargaining position or negotiating strategy of the public body. Property north of high school, currently leased to Virginia Tech, and pursuant to Virginia Code Section 2.2-3711A8 for consultation with legal counsel employed or retained by a public body regarding specific legal matters requiring the provision of legal advice by such counsel. Contract discussions regarding the comprehensive agreement for the West Falls Church Economic Development Project. Councilmember Connolly?
Yes.
Duncan?
yes.
Hardy?
Yes.
Lichtenhouse?
Yeah.
Hiscott?
Yes.
Snyder?
Abstain.
Tarter? Yep. All right, so let's take a 5-minute break to 9:47, and we'll reconvene in closed session. Thank you.
Just being extra cautious.
Yes, indeed. Thank you.
And Mayor, FCC TV is up and running. And let me just see if Celeste has seen the live stream. That has a slight delay.
I thought these weren't being live streamed, but they were being recorded for later.
On FCC TV cable, that's correct, but the Granicus live stream on the website is live, so the public can still access your meeting.
All the cord cutters can still see us.
All right. All right, Mayor, you're good to go. Thank you.
All right,
for your patience.
Sure. Thank you very much for coming out of closed session. And the first order of business is a motion to come out of closed session. Upon a motion made by Council Member
Hardy.
and seconded by Council Member
Snyder.
Scott.
and passed by a vote of City Council. Council reconvened in open session. Councilmember Conley?
Yes.
Duncan?
Yes.
Hardy?
Yes.
Lichtenhouse?
Yes.
Hiscott?
Yes.
Snyder?
Yes.
Tarter? Yep. All right, it is 11:08. This is our certification. Upon a motion made by council member.
Yes, Scott.
All right, nice work. And seconded by council member.
Hardy.
And passed upon affirmative roll call vote in open session, it was certified that only public business matters lawfully exempted from open meeting requirements and only such public business matters as were identified in the motion by which the closed meeting was convened were heard, discussed, or considered in a closed session or meeting by the body. Councilmember Connolly?
Yes.
Duncan?
Yes.
Hardy?
Yes.
Lichtenhouse?
Yeah.
Hiscott?
Yes.
Snyder?
Abstain.
Tarter? Yep. All right. Anything else to talk about tonight?
No
I
to
know we're
adjourn.
gonna be lonely. We didn't stay up till 1 doing this, but hopefully we can find something good to do with the rest of the evening. So anyway, thank you all. I guess that's it. Why don't we go on and enjoy ourselves, and thank you all, and stay safe and healthy, and we'll see you next week.